All right, welcome everyone to this episode of Pathways to Energy Efficiency. This is going to be our last episode, so we're really excited to have you here. Just give us a few moments and we will be getting ready in a moment. All right, once again, thank you all for joining us. This has been a really great series that we've all really enjoyed. We hope you have learned a lot. If there's topics that you are still interested in learning about, you can always reach out to us at any time and we can kind of provide you some guidance and information on anything that you might be concerned about when it comes to energy efficiency in your home, audits, renewable energy choices for your home and things like that. So please feel free to reach out. If you haven't seen some of our previous Pathways to Energy Efficiency, maybe this is your first time joining us, you can actually check out all of our past episodes by going to our Facebook pages. So we have a number of Facebook pages that these episodes have been hosted on. Those include the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Jefferson County Facebook page, the Cornell Cooperative Extension of St. Lawrence County Facebook page, and the Adirondack North Country Association Facebook page. And some of the topics that we have discovered have included topics surrounding renewable energy. So we've discussed community solar or hydroelectric for your home. We've learned about residential solar, so installing solar panels on your property. We've talked about renewable heating and cooling, so biomass stoves and heat pumps and things like that. And we talked a lot about different ways that you can get an energy audit, which is always the first step when you are approaching any of these topics, is to address the efficiency of your home first. And so there's a lot of pathways you can take to actually get a free home energy audit and sometimes free upgrades for your home too. And so if you're interested in pursuing some of that, we encourage you to reach out and we can help find the right resources and the right programs that might be best for you and your family. So if you wanted to reach out to us, here is our contact information. If you live in Jefferson and Lewis County, you can reach out to me, Catherine Ripstein. I work out of Cornell Cooperative Extension of Jefferson County. If you live in Clinton, Essex, or Hamilton counties, you can reach out to Jennifer Perry. She works out of the Adirondack North Country Association office. And then if you live in St. Lawrence and Franklin counties, you can reach out to Nick Hamilton Honey, who works out of the Cornell Cooperative Extension of St. Lawrence County office. And so we are your community energy advisors. We're here to provide education and resources for you surrounding your home's energy use. So just a real quick review, you always want to address energy efficiency first in your home before pursuing any other options. And so today we're going to be talking a lot about insulation and choosing the right insulation, and that's all part of your energy efficiency. And now, even though we're giving you this information on insulation, it's always easier when working with a professional who's been trained in this types of information. And so the best way to determine how well your building envelope is performing, and we'll cover that in a minute, is to get a free home energy audit. And then to have a contractor perform the energy efficient upgrades in your home. So all energy audits are free for all New York State residents. You can get one, anyone in New York State can get one. Certain energy efficient upgrades can be paid for by New York State if you are an income eligible resident. So if you fall within the low to moderate income categories, you might be able to actually have some of the energy efficient your home paid for. And last but not least, we have had an episode on do-it-yourself energy efficiency practices that you can focus on. And once again, reach out to us if you are interested in any of this and we can help you get started. So reviewing energy efficiency, one main topic that we talked about in the past is the building envelope and how important that is to your home's efficiency. So if you're heating your home, you want a nice tight box to keep that heat within your home. If you're cooling your home, the same concept. You don't want to be paying to heat the outside air. And so the concept that comes into play here is the building envelope. So this is the separation of the heated and unheated spaces of your home. So if we can see in this diagram, this yellow line represents that boundary between the heated main living areas of this home and the unheated spaces such as the attic or the crawl space or back porches. And so now there's two main things that make up the building envelope, and that's insulation, which we're going to be talking about today, and an air barrier, so air sealing. And it's really important which order you have these in. So insulation you can compare to a wool sweater. So putting on a wool sweater in on a cold day, it's going to keep you nice and warm. However, there's still holes in that wool sweater that allow air from the wind blowing to penetrate and cool you off. So adding an air barrier on top of your wool sweater, such as we'll compare that to a windbreaker jacket, that'll help reduce that amount of heat loss. So I've got my cozy wool sweater and I have my air breaker over it. The air breaker is blocking that wind from penetrating inside my home, and the insulation is providing that heat, the warmth, and the resistance to the flow of heat. And so it's really important, if I were to, which order you put those in, if I were to wear my wool sweater over my air barrier, my jacket would not work as well. So it's always important to have insulation and then the air barrier on the outside of the insulation. So as we are looking into that, we're going to discuss R value. Okay, so R value it can be used to discuss insulation. And what it is the resistance to heat flow. And so we call that also the resistance value, or R value. Now you can look at it as this equation down here, but really what R value boils down to is how well of an insulator something is. Now, if I have any campers or hikers out there, you might have come across R value before if you're choosing an air pad or a sleeping mattress to sleep on when you're outside sleeping in a tent. They are stated in R values. So the higher the R value you have, the better the insulator it is. So that's just the thing you want to know. R value is going to tell you how well or poorly something is at insulating. So reducing that flow of heat. And so the higher the R value, the better insulator it is. And the lower the R value, the worse it is at insulating. So for instance, if you had a R value of 8 versus an R value of 16, an insulation with an R value of 16 is reducing heat flow twice as fast as that of the R value of 8. And so different types of insulations have different R values per inch and vary in construction and installation applications. So now we're going to start kind of getting into shifting from our talk about R value to talking about different insulations and the pros and cons about it. But before we do that, we need to look at this factor in choosing insulation. So when we're building codes regulate all of the how our buildings are constructed, and we have to adhere to building codes, and building codes are really affected by your climate zone as well. So the climate zone is most commonly used by farmers to determine what kind of crops they can grow. So it's climate zones are basically your climate is your temperature, moisture, wind, and sun, including the daily and seasonal patterns. And so these climate zones do also affect our building codes. Moving to the next slide. And so the building codes for the North Country, as you can see down here, minimum levels of insulation required in new build home for 1990 code. So the building codes affect the amount of the R value that is required within your home in certain areas. So you can see in your walls, you're required to have an R value of 14. And how do they determine that? With an energy audit. They can determine how your home is performing with things like that. And so your attic, you can see here that has the highest required R value of 30. So you can kind of see that different areas of your home are required to have different levels of insulation based on building codes. So getting into the types of insulations, you can see that there's a big list here of all the different types of insulations and their corresponding R values. So now in a few minutes, Nick is going to take us through the pros and cons of each different type of insulation and relate that back to their R value in the end. But before they do, we want to look at this R value per inch. And that's one thing I want you guys to know is that R value is measured in inch and R value stack. So if you take the space between your wall, and it's a 3-inch deep space in your wall that you need to put insulation in. If you chose an insulation with an R value of 3.2, you times that 3.2 by 3 because it's per inch and you are stacking that R value. If you relate this back to the last slide, you can see R value of 14 over here. Well, none of these insulations have an R value of 14, but that's because they stack and it's based on the volume and that R value stacks on itself. So you can achieve an R value of 14 in your walls, but you're going to have to calculate that based on the volume. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Nick, and Nick's going to take us through the different pros and cons of the different types of insulations.
All right, so we're going to start with blankets. So these are bats or rolls of insulation, and this includes fiberglass or mineral wool, and we're going to start with fiberglass. And fiberglass is kind of that typical pink insulation that we might all think about when we're thinking about insulation, right? With all of the insulation, we'll talk about the different types. There are pros and cons for each. And you know, you're going to have to weigh that up upon what you're looking for as far as your location in your home and what you want to achieve. And so fiberglass, some of the pros, it's pretty common and it is the least expensive. It can come both with or without the vapor retarder. And so if we're looking at the pictures in this slide, there is a vapor retarder on the top, right, and not one on the bottom. It is flame resistant. And because it's so common, it comes in various depths and widths. And again, because of the different depths, those different, even if you would have, you know, the same manufacturer, but it's different inch-wise, those will be providing different R values. So the cons, it doesn't act as an air barrier. So remember, Katie said that, you know, we're putting the wool sweater on and then we want that air, you know, sealant layer. The fiberglass does not act as that air barrier. It is not recommended for, you know, gaps. And it's difficult to install correctly. And this is really important. And there's the little graphic right there on the right-hand side where you really have to be mindful that you get the whole way to the edges. There's not any cracks or areas where air can get through, that when you're dealing with the bats, that you're not just putting it in over top of something. So the figure there on the right, the top part of that really shows like a pipe of some sort, could be plumbing, could be electrical, and the bat is just rolled right over that. That would not be the proper way to install the bat or the roll. You want to make sure that you're getting the whole way around that, either pipe or electrical line. And so then mineral wool, right? Also in bats and rolls, it's hydrophobic, so it does not attract water, right? It won't absorb water. So that, you know, discourages any mold or mildew growth, which is really good. It has a higher R value than the fiberglass. It is also flame resistant. It can contain up to 70% recycled materials. So this is good, right, when we're thinking about the environment. It's very durable in both high and low temperatures, right? So thinking about as you go further south and you have very high temperatures, or you know, up here in our area when we get into January and February where we have very low temperatures. And this material has an ability to absorb some sound. So it can act as a kind of a sound muffler. Not that it's going to give you music quality sound room absorption, but it can help with that. If we think about the cons then for the mineral wool, it does cost more than the fiberglass. It's not available in all the sizes that the fiberglass bats and rolls are. It's almost never with the paper face. And then because of this denser material that it is both heavier. So each roll is just inherently heavier. And then it's more difficult to cut than the fiberglass. And if you can see right there on that bottom picture on this slide, you can see that kind of like bowing, right, of that the person's installing. And then we're going to move to cellulose. And cellulose has been in wide use since the 70s. It is almost entirely waste or recycled newspaper, which is great if we're thinking about the environment and the potential for global warming. It is less expensive, and it's made up of 20% non-toxic borate, which can help resist fire, insects, and mold. And the application can be either done dry or wet. So just looking at the pictures on the top, those are dry applications. The picture that's on the lower right then is that wet application of the cellulose. Some of the cons of cellulose, it does hold liquid water. And so the use of a vapor retarder is not recommended. Long-term exposure to water can cause sagging or corrosion of other materials. So thinking about, blowing that into your walls is going around pipes, which could be metal, around electric wiring, right? So those could potentially see some corrosion. Should the cellulose get exposed to water. There is material settling. This can be mitigated though by dense packing. So that's really making sure that there is a nice thick layer in those cavities. It does take more thickness to achieve those high R values. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but that table where we saw the different R values according to product per inch. So we would need more inches of cellulose to achieve those higher R values. And you really want to make sure that you have qualified contractors installing this insulation. I do want to draw your attention to the picture on the upper right, and that is an application in an attic. So the contractor literally puts in almost like a measuring stick and can blow in that insulation to whatever height you need, right? So the application of cellulose in an attic is really good, and combining that with other applications is effective. So foam board or rigid foam, right? These are, when you're thinking of insulation, usually the bats or rolls, we think of the pink stuff. This stuff is kind of that very hard, doesn't bend, right? Either white or, tan with a metal sheeting on it, or the kind of pink, green, or blue. And we'll talk about each of those. You can see them there in that picture in the upper right. So pros for foam board: it can be used in roofs, walls, foundation walls, and slabs and rim joists. So it can be used in pretty much every application in your home. It can improve overall thermal performance by eliminating thermal bridging through the framing. So what this does is keeps is just an extra bit of way of reducing the heat loss from your conditioned or heated spaces out into nature, or out into areas that are unheated in your home. such as the attic or crawl spaces. This can offer some of the best R values among the foam options, right? So these are talking about just the rigid foam or spray foam. These products are water resistant, and they can have foil or plastic facing, which helps with that air barrier. So there are the three types: the expanded polystyrene board, or EPS for short, sometimes called B board, does not use hydrofluorocarbons, so are the greenest choice out of the three. The extruded polystyrene board, or XPS, also known as blue board. And again, this is the one in the picture that's pink. It can be pink, blue, or green, and really that is dependent upon who's manufacturing that, right? That is a little bit more resistant to moisture. And then the polyisocyanurate board, or polyiso for short, offers the best R value between 6.5 and 8 per inch, right? So it's good R value per inch. Cons with the foam board or the rigid foam: it must be tightly fitted to stop air infiltration. When you have joins, you have to make sure that they're taped because you want to prevent that airflow. Use of small canisters of the spray foam needs to be done to seal some of the larger voids that you can't as easily just cut these pieces of foam board or rigid foam into. These boards are actually susceptible to sunlight, and so the UV rays of the sun actually damage it. So you have to make sure that you're storing and installing it properly. Air bubbles in the EPS can actually accumulate moisture and lead to it being ineffective. And it's too brittle to be used for underground purposes. XPS uses the hydrofluorocarbons in its production and has several thousand times the CO2 equivalents of some of the other foam boards. And polyiso also uses the hydrofluorocarbons in its production and suffers from decreasing R value over the life of the product, also with decreasing temperatures. So it's not as effective R value once you're getting below 55 degrees, and it reduces R value if it were to get wet. And then spray foam. We think most times of spray foam as open celled or closed celled, and those have some pros and cons, but spray foam as a general application, the pros are high R value and effective air barrier in a single application, right? So you're both working on that wool sweater and that air breaker, the windbreaker. Can keep contaminants out of your indoor air. So again, because it's that effective air barrier, it's providing that resistance to contaminants from outside. Can be sprayed, poured, or injected into almost any space. It expands completely to fill an area and does not sag. So this expansion is, there's more expansion with the open cell application than there is the closed cell spray foam. And it can add strength to walls and roof, right? Closed cell is impermeable to water, so it deters mold and mildew buildup better. Closed cell can also reduce some of that outside noise. Open cell is less expensive than the closed cell, and they're both fire retardant. So cons with spray foams: it must be done by an experienced installer. If you don't have an experienced installer, it increases the chance of health effects from the application, damage to the structure, or potential future problems, right? So we're thinking about, should there be small leaks or gaps then if you have water coming into the home, the water is going to find the least resistance and could actually wind up doing more damage to your home if spray foam was not installed correctly. Extreme temperatures can sometimes lead to shrinking. So we're thinking like, desert, or, if there was long periods of very extreme cold. The primary ingredients are chemical compounds that can be very high in those greenhouse gas components, right? So these are kind of like those hydrofluorocarbons. To minimize potential ill effects following an application of spray foam, you want to make sure that you're ventilating your area and that you give the product time to cure. Open cell foam allows water vapor to pass through and has a lower R value for a given thickness than closed cell. So just thinking about, again, those two different types of spray foam themselves. And then this particular application is actually more expensive than other installations. You have to make sure that you have an experienced installer, and then it also needs specialized equipment to be installed. And so we saw those two slides that Katie was talking about, stacking your R value. When you are making the decision to, upgrade your insulation for your home, or you're building a new home and you're thinking about what you want to insulate it with, you have to think about the location in the house, right? So are we talking about the walls? Are we talking about the attic? Are we talking about the foundation? Are we talking about rim joists, right? You then have to take into consideration also the type of insulation. So are we looking at cellulose versus the fiberglass or mineral wool versus those foam boards, whether they be the different types of rigid foam boards or spray foam, right? And then having to think about R value for each inch of those different types of insulation. You can also combine some of these different forms of insulation. And when you're doing upgrades to your home, you're putting on new siding into your home. That rigid foam board is good because then you're breaking that bridging that can occur between the inside and the outside of your home, which adds extra warmth to your home. So some of these applications are really good if you have walls open or siding is getting, you're putting new siding on, right? So you don't have to just think about insulation as, just on a new home. Our older home stock here in the North Country can actually, use many of these various different forms of insulation to up that R value and make you more comfortable within your home. And so, again, as Katie said, this is our last episode of Pathways to Energy Efficiency. If you want to look back at any of the other episodes we have done for this Pathways to Energy Efficiency, you can go to Cornell Cooperative Extension of Jefferson County's Facebook page, our CCE of St. Lawrence County website under the Energy tab. They're listed in Pathways to Energy Efficiency, and then ANCA, or Adirondack North Country Association's Facebook page. And before we sign out, it looks like we do have a question. So the question is, how can I request an installer use one type of insulation over another? And that's a very good question, right? So you're going to have to make sure that either you talk to your community energy advisor, and they might know different contractors, what applications they are most comfortable with, or which ones they use as far as insulation. And sometimes if you're doing work and you want to then approach the contractors, right? So you're getting estimates for work done. You should ask the contractors, what types of insulation do you work with? Because you might have, certain contractors that don't use spray foam at all. Certain contractors might be very used to using spray foam, and they are, they do that quite often. So asking your contractor and or asking your community energy advisor would be the kind of first step, right? How can I make sure that an installer air seals properly? So this is part of that energy efficiency, the 3 steps, right? So you want to make sure that you're getting an energy audit done on your home before you have work done. That will give you the baseline so you know how much insulation you need to add and where it'll be most effective to add that insulation within your home. And to really find out, because we didn't really talk much about the air barrier. We were talking about R value and insulation specifically, but the air barrier, the best way to figure out how many air exchanges you have per hour is to have a blower door test done. And again, you can talk to your community energy advisor about that. And in Jefferson and Lewis County, that's Katie out of CCE Jefferson County. In St. Lawrence and Franklin County, that is me out of CCE St. Lawrence County. And then for Clinton, Essex, and Hamilton counties, that's Jen Perry out of Anka. And as always, glad that you could join us today. And please check out any of our episodes in the past for more information or give us a call. Thank you all.